ve společnosti Best Value Group, byl také vedoucím Best Value Core týmu od roku 2012 v Rijkswaterstaatu v agentuře Ministerstva pro infrastrukturu a životní prostředí. Je také vítěz Dutch Sourcing Awards 2012 za provozní dokonalost a nejlepší veřejnou zakázku při implementaci Best Value v hodnotě nad 500 000 eur. Je spoluautorem holandské knihy o Best Value, člen nizozemské certifikační rady Best Value a má 20 let zkušeností v oblasti zadávání veřejných zakázek a infrastrukturních projektů.
Okay, so good morning everyone. And as you notice, I will be speaking in English and not in Slovakian or Czech. I think there's a translation, but you probably already said that. I'll try to keep it really simple. This morning I will go into the highlights, and in the afternoon Jaap and I will get into more detailed stuff. So I think Thomas introduced me already. I've been working in Rijkswaterstaat for about 15 years, and we started Best Value in 2009. And ever since I've been working with the Best Value approach, and we've written a number of books. So we have the one to the left is actually where we describe the methodology, and we also have lots of case studies, and they're in the yellow and in the green book. And the blue book is actually the first book translated into Polish, and the white book is the Dutch book translated into Norwegian. So as a company, we're also working in Norway. They started last year with lots of big infrastructure projects, and they have about 10 pilot projects right now going on. So in the Netherlands, we have hundreds of Best Value projects. So today I'd like to share my experience with you. So I have 45 minutes and a lot of topics to cover, so we'll start quickly. First of all, I'd like to explain why do we use Best Value, and then what is Best Value, how does it work, how does it work in the EU legislation, and if I have some time left, probably not, I have some case studies from the Netherlands. So during the presentation, I will be using some words, and so everyone understands what I'm talking about. I put them on the slide. So when I talk about the client, I'm talking about the contracting authority, so it's the buyer. And we talk about the vendor, is the supplier. And Thomas put the right word, hopefully, next to it, so everyone understands. I will also be using the word dominant information. And dominant information means very simple, clear information that everyone understands. So the most dominant information that we have in the world is the language of metrics, of data. So when we look at numbers, everyone sees the same, right? If you are from Slovakia, Czech Republic, if you're from the Netherlands or from Norway, everyone sees the same. So the most dominant information is the language of metrics. Then we'll talk about risk and mitigation, and talk about mitigation measures. We'll talk about the deliverable, and we'll talk about requirements. Okay, so kicking off. And I heard from the previous speakers that you have some problems with the low price in your countries, right? But maybe this is a surprise for you, but we have some problems in the Netherlands too. Okay? So I put some examples of stuff that's been going on in the Netherlands, and it's even still going on. So our country is not perfect either. So, and actually, my question to you would be: one of these pictures does not belong here. So anyone has an idea which does not belong here? Any? Yeah, you have an idea there? No, just. But you have. Can you? Exactly. That's the correct answer, right? So, the one to the right, that's really the problem of the contractor. He created this problem, and the other pictures are actually all clients' requirements that were the problem. So I would say you're pretty much an expert already. So in the Netherlands we have lots of problems, and the question you can ask is what causes these problems? And we not only have this problem in the Netherlands, actually it's a global problem. When we work in Norway, we see that they have the same problems that we have in the Netherlands. You mentioned, I think someone mentioned the Brandenburg, the Berlin airport, which has been a big problem for the Germans. So over budget, over time is a problem that we see all in the world, also in the United States. And when you run low price, and some words have been said about that already. So this is one of the problems that you have when you run a low price competition, right? So when you start, it all looks very good. And then when you finish, you will find out that you actually paid a lot of money. So the small boat would be the original contract, and the large boat would be the change contract. So one of the things that puzzled me is why is low price actually such a bad idea? And I try to explain to you what the problems are working with a low price. And one of the problems is, I saw that you were talking about supply chain, is that we work together in a supply chain, and we all have these different departments. And these departments can be departments within our own organization, and they can also be vendors or suppliers that are outside our organization. And one of the problems that we have, if we have to cooperate with all these different parties in the supply chain, is that we have to communicate, and we don't understand each other. And one of the reasons that we have this problem is that we tend to go towards the technical details, right? So when we work in such a silo, we have our own language that no one else understands, right, if you're not part of the silo. So if we have to communicate with other silos, it's very difficult. And if we make it more technical, it will even become more difficult. So if we want to get out of this situation, what we should do is actually lift our heads up and look from the 30,000 foot level. So we have to all look at what the project goals are if we are doing an infrastructure project, right? Because that's what the end customer is worried about. He wants to achieve the project goals. So the end customer is not really interested in all the technical nitty-gritty and all the technical details. So I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of lean. And lean is also a methodology that puts the end goals of the customer in a central position. So when we talk about best value, basically what we try to do is to implement lean in the supply chain. So everyone's working for the end customer, and so we should really reduce waste and make it as efficient as possible. And one of the concepts of waste, for instance, and I think the previous speaker talked about it, is a very detailed technical specification. Because if you have an expert that's working for you, it's not very logical to give him a very detailed specification, because probably he'll know better to do what to do than you do as a client, right? So this is a form of waste that you really should avoid. Okay, so talking about low price, and this is the Trojan horse, as you might be familiar with, and everything seems great when you have the procurement, and after a while you find out that you have a real big problem. And there's this nice saying in English, and it says, so if you buy peanuts, you get monkeys, right? So, yeah. So basically, I think back in the 90s in the Netherlands, we had this also this problem. We were doing a lot of low price buying, and we had this parliamentary inquiry committee that was looking into the problem of actually fraud and collusion. So the problem that we had in the Netherlands was that the low price system actually made our contractors collude. So they sat together before the competition, and they agreed about which party was going to be offering the lowest price. So they could actually still earn a margin. And it's so actually what we saw in the Netherlands was that one of the problems that we had was the low price system, which actually led to collusion and to a lot of problems. So one of the findings of this committee was that we should actually abandon the low price system and go more towards a system where we have price and quality, just as the previous speaker, I think, pointed out. So we're talking about corruption and all that, and fraud. Well, in the Netherlands, we realized that the low price system is actually enhancing corruption. So we try to avoid it as much as possible. Okay, so talking about the best value approach, the best value approach really is all about common sense and making things very simple and very logic. So I'll share some logical concept with you, see if you can buy into these ideas. So this is the first question that I have. So if you are outsourcing something, and whether it's a service or a work, I don't mind, right? And you're outsourcing it. So Who knows better how to do the job? Is it the client or is it the vendor? Logically speaking. Sorry? It's the vendor, of course. Otherwise, why would you outsource if you outsource to someone that does not know how to do the job as well as you do? So logically speaking, it should be the vendor that knows better how to do the job. Okay, we're talking about communication, right? So if the vendor is the expert and he knows better how to do the job, who should be doing the talking and who should be doing the listening? Who should be talking? It should be the client should be talking. Okay, so we have the client here and he's the non-expert, and we have the vendor and he's the expert, and the client is telling the vendor what to do. Is that a very logical idea? I don't think so. No. So what we're saying is, it should be the vendor. If anyone's talking at all, it should be the vendor. It should not be the client talking, right? Because the client's talking, you'll probably get more risk. Is that a logical concept? Can we buy into that? Okay. So here's the problem in our industry. It's called micromanagement, or wrong party talking, okay? So, and you can also project this on your marriage, I guess. I don't know if you ever tried this idea on your partner. I don't think it will work, okay? So, basically what we're saying here is that if you are the client and you're chatting in the vendor's ear all day, what will happen to the vendor is probably, if they're a real good vendor, they'll run away, right? But they probably become reactive, right? And they will less likely be using their expertise because they want to be customer friendly, and they just ask you, or they just do what you ask them to do, right? So micromanagement, I would say, is never a good idea. It's not a good idea within your own organization, and it's also not a good idea in the supply chain. So telling someone what to do and give him detailed instructions and micromanaging him is never a good idea, and especially not in the supply chain. So when we're working with vendors as a client, we should really stop doing this. And there's another problem with this picture, that if you want to select the expert vendor and you're talking in his ear all day, how can you find the best vendor, right? So probably the best thing to do if you want to find an expert vendor is, we have this in our primary school, shut your mouth. It's just to listen to the vendors and hear what they've got to say, and probably be much easier to pick the best vendor. So the more we talk, the less likely we'll find the expert vendor. Would be the conclusion from this logic, okay? So now let's look at minimum specifications. So we have 4 vendors here in this picture, and vendor 4 is like really scary. We don't want this one, okay? Because he has a really low performance and a very high risk profile. Usually this goes hand in hand. So it's like a walking risk, vendor number 4, okay? And vendor number 1, he's great. He's got the best people, does very good projects, and he has low risk because he really knows what he's doing, right? So let's say we're in a traditional procurement organization, and we don't want vendor 4 on our projects. So what's the most common thing that people do? Anyone? Yeah, but how do you do that? No, I said we don't want vendor number 4. I'll give the answer. But one of the most, let's say, popular things to do is to put in a minimum specification. And a minimum specification can take all sorts of forms. It can be a selection criteria, and it can also be a technical specification to avoid vendor 4 running to your project. But now let's say you award only based on low price. And we have vendor number 1 with his expert people, and now he has to bid for this project. What will happen here? Right? This is probably what will happen, right? Vendor number 4 will not send his best people to your project because they maybe have too high wages, right? So you get, let's say, the beginners. Because they have to compete with vendor number 4 now that's actually offered maybe on the performance line, or maybe a little bit below, because he wants to have the cheapest price, right? That's the only way you can win this competition here. So basically what we're saying here is that if we implement a minimal requirement and we go low price, actually the minimum requirement has become a paradox, because it has become the maximum quality that all the vendors will deliver. right? And this is where the clients, they start coming less, they got surprised, they get angry about the clients, and the next time they run a competition, they put in more requirements, right? So this is like a circle that enhances itself, a vicious circle, and the only way to get out of this circle is to start awarding on quality next to price, okay? I think we'll share all the slides, right? Because I see people taking pictures, so... Is that right, Thomas?
Yes.
Okay. So basically, if we look at experienced people and inexperienced people, if you are very inexperienced, you have no plan, right? The only one you listen to is the client, and you just do what the client's telling you to do. So basically, you're not using your brain. The only thing that you're using is your hands, right? And what we want to do is to use the expertise from the vendors. So we don't want them to use their brains, because we know that experts, they actually have a plan. And if you are an expert, you think of the overall project, because you know what you're doing. If you're a non-expert, you can only look at yourself and really care about yourself, right? So this one is about me, myself, and I, and the other one is about interfacing with others. So an expert vendor will actually think about risk that is outside of his control, because that's what prevents him from achieving the results of the project, okay? So looking at the procurement law. But basically what I'm saying is that we have a systems problem here that's causing all these results that we have in the project. So if we want to change the project results, we should change the system. When we started Best Value, lots of lawyers, and it was like, I think 2010, 2011, I was talking to the lawyers, and they told me, this cannot be done because this methodology comes from the United States, and we have the EU legislation, and they said we will have a problem. Well, we looked into that, and one of the things that we done in the Netherlands is, we translated the American methodology to the European legislation framework. And we have lots of discussions with lawyers. We still have discussions with lawyers because lawyers like to have discussions, right? So. But finally, all lawyers in the Netherlands, even the professors, they agreed that we can actually do this in the EU legislation framework. And I have some slides later on, which I share a little bit more details with you. So looking at the best value approach, and it comes from the United States, well, there are a number of claims. And the most important reason that we start using the best value approach is to get better project results, of course, right? Because that's what we all care about. And interestingly enough, and I really want to strike this point, if you want to implement a sustainable system, I think both parties will have to win. So it will have to be the clients that will get better projects, but also the vendors should have more profits. And if you're in a traditional procurement mind, it's a strange idea that actually vendors will get more margins, right? But it's the only way the sector can be competitive and can invest money in research and development and invest money in education. So if you implement a system, I think both parties will have to win, and not just the client or just the vendor. So everyone should win. So we have some Dutch case studies, and you can find them on this website. If I have some time left, I will share some of that information with you. So let's look at best value approach. Basically what we're saying, the consequence of this logic, that if you are a best value buyer, so a client organization, you should take the role of a non-expert, right? So you should assume that the expertise is actually on the vendor side. So if you want to create a request for proposal, you just write down what you think you want, and you make the vendors propose their most optimal solution for your problem, right? And we will allow the vendors to differentiate based on metrics. I will explain what metrics are later on. So this means that that the vendor will take the role of the expert, right? And on the right hand side we see the low price system, and that's where the buyer actually takes the role of the expert, and he creates all the requirements. So what we are saying is that we actually should not do the stuff that's on the right side, and we should do the stuff that's on the left side. I'll skip this one. Sorry. So what should the vendor do? Well, actually, the vendor, and Jaap will talk about this afternoon, they should identify experts within their company and track their performance. And they should actually utilize that expertise to offer the bid, okay? But we are talking about best value for a low price, so they should also not only offer their best expertise, but they should also be offering a low price. Because we think that best value and low price can go hand in hand, okay? And if we look at the traditional way of bidding from the vendor side, we'll see that they send in their marketing people, right, the sales people, and they're actually bidding the projects, and when they won, they leave, and you get the other team, right? So that's not working. So one of the things that we're saying, and that's also common sense, is that when we run the procurement process, we want to see the experts that will actually be doing the project instead of the marketing people. Okay, so that's another difference there. Okay. How much time do I have left? 24 minutes. Okay, I think I'm good on track. So let's look at how the best value system works then, a little bit more in detail. I wrote down here best price quality ratio. Best price quality ratio is the same as MEAT, so most economically advantageous tender. And if we look at best value, what we do is that we weigh price for 25%. And we weigh quality for 75%. And that might seem like a crazy idea, but I'll show you in the next slide that it's actually really clever to do this. And when we look at the quality aspects, we have 4 criteria that we use. We have a project capability or level of expertise document. The idea behind this document is that the vendors can show their level of expertise or their contribution to the project goals of the client. And we'll show some examples of that later on. The second document is the risk assessment plan. And the risk assessment plan is about risks that are outside the vendor's control, right? So we're talking about expert vendors. Expert vendors actually have no risk within their control because they're experts, okay? So the only risk expert vendors have is risk outside the control. So what we ask the vendors to do is to think about what risks are there, client risks, and also what mitigation measure, so what plan do they have to mitigate this client risk, okay? So, and you can only do this if you're an expert and if you know what you're doing. And the third one, and I understood from the lawyer that you have some problems with this in your legislation, is the value added plan. So usually the client has some idea about what he asked, but it could be possible that the vendors actually have ideas about value adds that they can offer, which contribute to the project goals. Since he's also competing on price, he doesn't want to put them in his price. So the value adds are actually not weighed. We don't weigh the price. So he's not penalized for the price of the value adds. And Jaap and I will show some examples of this afternoon. And finally, and most importantly, I would say, is interviewing the key personnel. So like I explained in the previous sheet, we want to talk to the project managers that actually do the execution of the project. So if it's an engineering service, we want to talk to the project manager. And the number 2 most important person. So when we first started this in the Netherlands, we got lots of protests from the Dutch contractors because they said, well, my project manager is actually working on the project. We don't want to use them in the tender, right? But that's the whole idea, that we want to see these people that are actually doing the project for us. So if you look at the importance of the criteria, you can see that the interviews are weighted the highest. So it's the most important criteria. Now, why is that? Because we know that the people that will be leading the project from the vendor side are the most critical success factor for the project, right? Because it's a people business that we are running. So the key personnel is really, really important here. Okay. Well, you might think if you go evaluate this much on quality, that it will become more expensive, right? Because price is less important than quality. Well, I have some results from the Dutch projects that I'd like to show to you. There's a very interesting thing that we found out in the Netherlands. Actually, what we found out is that a low price and high quality actually go hand in hand. So if you look at these statistics here, you can see that 100% of the winners are in the price top 3. So that means that they're the... Am I doing that? Okay, I'll just continue, right? so what we see here is that the winners of the best value tenders are in the price top 3. And in 12 projects, the winner also has the lowest price, which is 43%. And in 71% of the projects, the winner has the lowest price or the second lowest price. And the winner is the vendor that has the, let's say, the highest quality, right? So this is a very interesting statistic here, because what this tells you is that high quality and low price, they go hand in hand. And now you might wonder, how is this possible, right? Well, if you think logically, it's actually it's a logical idea, because experts, they actually know what they're doing, so they cut out all the waste that they don't need, and they just come up with this very lean and mean offer that is actually very efficient and also has a low price, right? So if you let experts create their plan, they will actually also deliver high quality for a very low price. I don't know if you ever heard about this person called Alfred Deming. He's the inventor of the plan, do, check, act circle, right? And he was looking at this car manufacturing industry. And what he proposed was, if you want to lower the cost, you should invest in quality, in the workers that are, producing these cars. So it's actually a very logical idea that a high quality and a low price go hand in hand. So procurement people, they should not be afraid that if you start using the best value approach, your project will become more expensive. I would say, however, that the price level probably would rise a little bit, because the contractors, they will be offering a fair price instead of just a very low price. Okay. So let's dive a little bit more into the details of this process here, and I think it's described in a document that is created by Thomas and his people. So if we look at the process, we have 4 phases. The first phase is the preparation phase. This is where the client creates the request for proposal, and hopefully the vendors are preparing their bid. The second phase is what we call the evaluation phase, or I guess you could also call it the procurement phase. This is where the competition is. The third phase is the clarification phase, and the clarification phase is actually still part of the procurement process. And I'll explain a little bit about it later on. And then the fourth phase is the execution phase. Now, what is different in best value than other types of methodologies is that in the evaluation phase, so in phase 2, we ask the vendors to write documents, but we ask them to write 6 pages, okay? So all they have to create is 2 pages level of expertise, 2 pages risk assessment, and 2 pages value add. Okay, so now why do we ask so few information, I think? Because logically speaking, experts know what they're doing, and they don't need a lot of space to write down what their plan is, okay? So I don't know, when I was in university and I didn't know the answer to the question from the professor, what I do is I write a very long story, and hopefully they found something that was, good. And if you know the answer to the question, you can give a very short and concise answer, right? So it's the same principle that we utilize here. So experts, they can be very short, they can be very concise, and they don't need a lot of pages. So we have 6 pages. And then we have these 2 interviews that last for, let's say, maximum 1 hour. And that's all we have. So basically, as a client, we don't know exactly how they actually will perform their plan. And this is the reason that we have phase number 3, which in my opinion is the most important phase, the clarification phase. In phase 3, with the vendor that has the meat, so the best price-quality ratio, we enter a phase which is still part of the procurement process, but the vendor gets the possibility to clarify their offer. So he's offered you a price, he's offered you a schedule, he's offered you some quality, and now we want to know how he will execute his plan. Because instead of the client writing down what the detailed specification was in phase number 1, we now have the vendor telling us how he will approach this project. So it's just the opposite way of the low price system. So it's actually the vendor that's creating a large part of the contract here, instead of the client creating a very detailed specification. Okay, and so we do that only with one vendor, because we know that in 95% of the cases, the vendor that has the most economically advantageous tender, I hate this word, meet, will also get the contract awarded. And as a client, we can still, in this phase number 3, we can still go to the number 2 if their offer is not valid. So, and this is a very crucial phase, and it's also very different from other procurement procedures. And yeah, so, and the 4th phase, the execution phase, it's important as a client to not fall back into, let's say, seagull behavior, so micromanagement, okay? So if you run best value procurement, and then you start controlling and checking all the documents and auditing the contractors, you actually fall back into the old behavior. So it's important that if you run this process, it also has consequences for the execution phase. And I know today we will be talking a lot about the procurement process, but in my opinion, the execution phase is also very important, because you can have a very successful procurement phase, but when, as a client, you fall back into the old behavior, I think you will encounter the same problems that you have in low-price projects again. So best value approach really is an approach that goes beyond procurement. It's also, let's say, a project management and a risk management approach that you will utilize as a client. Now, in the interview, they were asking me, what's the biggest challenge when you try to implement this? Well, my experience is that the biggest challenge is the client, okay? Because the client usually is a bureaucratic organization, and they have lots of problem of releasing control and utilizing the expertise of the vendors. So you might have a project team that is able to release control, but there are all these other departments that really have no message to that you're running a best value project there. So they will oppose the best value approach. So from my experience from the last 10 years, the biggest challenge lies in the client organizations. And the vendors, they're actually very happy to do this, because they can actually show their expertise, and they can show why they are really good. Okay, I think I have 13 minutes. Okay, so we're talking about these documents. I'll go a little bit more into detail about the documents that we are asking. So now, just to know where we are in phase number 2. So as a client, we have prepared the project. And one of the most important things that we've done is that we thought about what our project goals are. And the project goals is a very high-level goals that we want to achieve with this project. And it's also the basis for the assessment framework for the documents. So we've asked the vendors for the following documents. So the level of expertise, the risk assessment plan, the value-added plan, the price document, the schedule, and the project organization. Now, as you can see, we only rate 3 documents, and the other 3 documents are not rated. So the price document becomes part of the evaluation at the end of the process. The schedule, the planning, we look at it, and we can use it for asking questions during the interviews, but we don't rate it. And then we ask them, the project organization, which is to say, what are your 2 or 3 key persons that you will be sending to the interviews? Okay? So we only rate these 3 documents. And if you look about a little bit more detailed, what we are asking there is really to have the vendor show to what extent they can contribute to the realization of the project goals. So let me give you a very simple example. Let's say that you want an early delivery of your product, as early as possible. Okay, that's a very common project goal in the Netherlands, I guess same in your country. So then the vendors, they can actually claim that they can deliver it 2 months or 3 months earlier than your milestone, right? That could be a performance that they could offer. Okay. And now what we also ask in the best value approach is that they not only tell you how much quicker they can do it, but they can also show you information from previous projects that they were actually able to deliver earlier in previous projects, right? These metrics are very important. So that's the first one. Well, the second one is the client risks, of course. So the extent to which the bidder, sorry, there's a mistake there. The bidder substantiate that he's able to minimize the risk of the client, okay? So that's the idea about client risk. And then we have the value adds. So if we're talking about speedy delivery, it could be that a very cheap solution could be 3 months earlier, but if the client were to pay 200,000 euros more or something, then they could go 3 months even 3 months quicker, right? But it would make his offer more expensive, okay? So that's an example of a value add. And then we have the key individuals, and what we assess for the key individuals is really if they understand what the project is about. So we try to find out if they really can see the project from end to beginning, to see if they can identify risks, and that they can actually minimize risks for the client, right? So good project managers, they can do that. So vendors should realize that they should send in their best people if they want to win a best value project, because the vendors found out that if they didn't send their best people, they were losing, okay? Okay, so I talked a little bit about metrics, and I want to elaborate a little bit about that. So I have another question for you, okay? So here I have this scenario, and as you can see, they're all circles, and as you can see, they're all green, okay? So my question would be, which is the most green circle? So we can raise hands. Who thinks number 1, 3, number 2, 4? This is green, right? Not another color. No, 5, 6? Okay, so the whole idea behind this is that if we are starting a discussion, I think all the opinions would differ from each other. And we probably need a very long discussion to decide which circle is the most green circle. Okay, so I have another scenario for you. This is scenario 2. Okay. So I'm not going to even ask the question. Unless you're colorblind, you'll have problems identifying what is the most green circle, okay? So, and the concept of dominant information is that we don't have to think about it. So I like this word in English. It's called a no-brainer. Scenario 2 is a no-brainer. It's clear for everyone that circle 1 is a green circle. And let's say that we were the assessment committee for scenario 1, then we would have a very long discussion, and we probably would disagree, and then we would probably pick one, and half of the committee would be disappointed because they thought it was something else. So that's what we call decision-making as a client. And what I propose to you, if you start making decisions as a client, you actually have more risk. So the only thing you can do when you try to find an expert is look at dominant information. And if the information is not dominant, and you're in doubt, and you have to think as a client, I would propose that you not make a decision, and you just give them all the same rating. So in scenario 1, I would all give them the same rating. So I would not call a specialist to explain to me what is a circle and what is a green circle, which is the usual way of assessing bids, right? We bring in a specialist and let the specialist decide what is the most green circle. Okay, so that's not a good idea. So what we do is we only look at the information when it's dominant and clear and simple. And the most dominant information are metrics. Because if we look at data, no one can refute them or debate them. And they should be verifiable, they should be accurate. And they should have numbers in them, right? And they should show high performance, because we're looking for expertise. And if they're actually providing us numbers, the projects that they're talking about, they should be more or less the same projects than the project that we are talking about, right? So basically what we're saying in the best value approach is that instead of using the expertise of a client, we should be looking at this, okay? And a really simple example of this is, TripAdvisor. I mean, everyone uses this when they try to find a hotel. And we look at the data, right? And you can actually give the resemblance to your family situation. You can say, oh, I have two parents and 2 kids, 2 teenagers, and you can find the results for this family situation. So you can actually create the resemblance with your project. So what we're asking the vendors to do is to come up with this data to show to us that they're actually the green circle, right? So the vendors have a problem, a challenge here, I would say, to show the dominant information to the clients. Because I always like to say to the vendors, it's not my job to make you look good. So it's really the vendors' idea. Okay. I think I have 5 minutes. So a little bit more about the interviews. And I've talked a little bit about this already. We want to meet the critical personnel and to identify if they really thought about this project. So we really want experts, and one of the things that experts can do is they can actually look into the future, okay? Because they have experience. So that's what we try to find out in the interviews. And we will ask them, let's say, 20 questions in this hour to identify if they can look into the future and they know if what they're doing. Okay, so, well, and in the end you have to decide which vendor you will pick, and that means that you have to add quality and price. And basically there are two systems. Now, in Norway, the Norwegians, they like to use the point system. So that's where you put the price into the points and you put quality into points and you add them up together. And in the Netherlands, we love the monetary system, so we turn quality into a price and then add it to the price. And it really doesn't matter, I think, what system you use, just as long as it's transparent for the vendors, right? What you're going to be doing in your spreadsheet. So, and this afternoon, I think Jaap and I will show you some examples of how we do this. Okay, so I was talking about experts a lot. Well, does best value always find you a super vendor, Superman? The logical answer would have to be no, of course not, right? Because the vendors are the vendors. What best value will do is find the best available vendor. Or if you're a negative person, the least worst vendor. Is that even good English? Yeah, I think so. So it will find you the best available expert, and not all your problems will be solved when you use best value. So I have to, you know, be realistic here, okay? I have, I think, 3 minutes. A few remarks about the legal stuff, and probably skip the case study and leave it for the afternoon. Yeah, so I talked about the discussion that we have in the Netherlands, and right now we have a big discussion with the Norwegian lawyers again. And what we're actually doing is, I found out that lawyers actually, they only listen to other lawyers. So they're not listening to me, because I'm a procurement person. So we send in the Dutch lawyers to Norway to persuade them that it's possible. So maybe we should send the Dutch lawyers also to your country. I don't know. Anyway, so for me as a non-lawyer, some remarks here. So we adapted this to the European legislation. And obviously, these are the most important principles in the European legislation. So objectivity, transparency, and non-discriminatory. Those are the three principles. And of course, we learned that if you talk about the bidder, you're talking about the pre-qualification. And if you talk about the bid, so the offer, you talk about the award phase. So we looked at all these criteria. Well, I think he's left now, but he said functional specification is always a good idea. So no problem there for the lawyers. Okay. There's also no problem. Price is also not a problem. Very familiar with that. Well, project capability is interesting because if you only talk about past performance information, you might have a problem. But what we do in this document, we actually ask them for what they're offering in the future. And the underpinning of what they're offering is information from the past. So if you do this, it's actually legally possible to use past performance information as a, let's say, a proof of what they're offering in the future. Okay? So you should be aware of what you're doing here, but this is possible. Risk assessment plan, the lawyers thought it was a great idea. No problem there. Value added, they had the discussion. And I know you have the same discussion here. One of the discussions that we had is that when you talk about variance or alternative, there's lots of legislation about that. So you have to call them options, I learned. And then there's no problem in the Netherlands. But I don't have time to get into details, but maybe you, I think you have studied this topic extensively. Well, schedules, no problem. And interviews were also a part of the debate because lawyers thought that interviews were subjective. Okay, so, and in the afternoon, Jaap and I will explain a little bit about the measures that we took to prevent subjectivity. So we have this structured list with questions, which is more or less the same for all the different vendors, and we took numerous measures to make sure it was objective. But it is a point of discussion with lawyers in the net. It was a point of discussion. Of course, the rating and weighting is not a problem. And then the other discussion that we have is the clarification phase. And we have this discussion in Norway again too. Because what you cannot do in the clarification phase is to start negotiating, okay? Because that's not legally not possible. But what you can do is clarify the offer. So as long as you stay just in the clarification, then there should be no problem. But that, of course, would mean that you as a client, as a vendor, will have to set very strict rules for the clarification phase to prevent you from start negotiation. So we had some discussions with the lawyers there. Yeah, so just to conclude, I talk about why do we use the best value approach? Well, why do we use the best value approach is because we want to, yeah, I'm finished, to utilize the expertise of the vendor. And there are three, I think, very important principles. The first one is transparency, right? That's where we use the metrics. The first one is release control and not managing, directing, and controlling the vendors. And the third one is the use of information, right? So we have to use the information that's there to stop us as a client to start making decisions.
Okay, Wiebe, thank you very much. Dámy a pánové, potlesk pro Wiebe Witteveena. My bychom vás neradi ochotili o možnost se zeptat. To znamená, jestli máte někdo nějaký dotaz, tak vystřelte ruku nahoru. Zkusíme věnovat, jdeme tomu, že bychom udělali 2 dotazy. Můžeme se ptát ještě v průběhu, na začátku jdeme tomu dalšího bloku. Radši vás ochudíme o přestávku, než abychom vás ochudili o dotazy na našeho experta. Jestli má někdo nějaký dotaz, tak než se... Tak, jestli vás můžu prosit jenom se představit.
Dobrý den, Petr Jelínek, Brno University of Technology. I have a question regarding the... you mentioned that the evaluation best value approach is more based on objective here.
Oh, dear.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Is based on objective evaluation, not the subjective approach, right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is that if we are looking at meat, let's say the traditional meat, as we know it in the Netherlands, we get a committee with experts, and they look at the plans, and they will use their own expertise to judge which plan is the best. And what I propose is that instead of using the experts, we start to look at the data, the metrics, and the logical conclusion would be that we have to use our expertise less. Okay? That's what I was saying. Yeah.
Okay. And another question, if I may, regarding the interview.
Yeah.
Have you found any, or have you encountered any obstacles related to the EU law? I mean, because the lawyers say that the directives don't permit the interview because they say the bid or the offer must be in written.
Yeah, I think that's not something that's in the EU legislation. So the EU legislation gives room for interviewing key personnel. I think it's something in the Slovakian legislation. Is that correct? Am I correct? Or in the Czech legislation about the written, you can only assess written documents. We talked about this yesterday evening, I think. Yeah, I think it's something that you put in your regulation, but it's not in the EU legislation actually. Or maybe I don't know if you can comment, but no. Yeah. That's it. So I think, and Thomas explained to me that the Czech lawyers have a different opinion about this. The Czech lawyers, they think it's possible, but the Slovakian lawyers, they think it's not possible. So I'm confused here. I don't know.
Asi jsem to trošku zjednodušil, si myslím.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Tak máme další dotaz.
Tak dobrý den. Hello, my name is Martin Kolovratník. I'm from Czech Parliament. Wiebe, from our point of view, Czech Republic, we are at point 0, maybe 0.1.
Yeah.
You are somewhere in the future from our point of view. So how long was your way? How long time did it took to your country to do to these days?
Yeah, so that's a very, very fair question to ask. So I started working in the Rijkswaterstaat organization, so the Dutch highway agency, in 2001. And 2001 was when they actually started design-build contracts. So that has already been almost 20 years. I think in 2009, 2010, we started working the best value approach. But before that, so we had already, let's say, more or less 10 years of experience with functional specification and also assessing price and quality. So there actually was a good ground for the best value approach, right? So, and after that, well, right now, I think even now there's lots of clients that not using the best value approach. So I think it's been a very slow process that took us a lot of years in the Netherlands too. And the thing that kicked it off really was this parliamentary inquiry that I was talking about, when we realized that in the Netherlands we should really award more on quality instead of only on price. But it was beginning of 2000, so it's been almost 20 years to get where we are right now. So that should give you some idea of the challenge that you have ahead of you, I suppose. Yeah. So I look a little bit like, what's his name from Back to the Future. Okay.
Wiebe, if I may have a question.
Yeah.
We just had discussion about best value regarding tenders for the services. But how do you tender and assess the tenders for the works, for the construction works?
Yeah, so I didn't get into that. Hopefully we'll have a little bit more time this afternoon. But actually best value, because it's a very logical process, you can apply it to everything, okay? You can apply it to your private situation if you like, but in the Netherlands we apply it to catering, we apply it to copying machines, we apply it to engineering services, we apply it to works. So we basically apply it to almost everything because it's just common sense. So it doesn't matter if you're procuring engineering services or construction works. It's the same process actually.
And the weight of the price is similar?
Always the same. Always 25 or 20% and always 75% quality. Because what you're looking for is expertise. And that's what you try to pick the expert. And if you're trying to pick the engineering expert or the building expert, you're always looking for expertise.
To, co musím ale říct, tak v Holandsku, jestli jste slyšeli, je to úžasná informace, v Holandsku převážně zadávají na žlutý FIDIC, to znamená design build, to znamená, je tam prostor hodnotit kvalitu. I'm just mentioning that you actually tender on the yellow FIDIC, so you assess the quality of the design of the proposal. Yes. With the red FIDIC, as in the Czech Republic and Slovakia we do. You think that the best value still could be applicable?
Okay, yeah. So I understand that you use a red FIDIC. I think to use best value, there have to be some degrees of freedom for the vendors to differentiate themselves upon. So if there is absolutely 0 degrees of freedom, then it's very hard to use best value approach because what are they differentiating on? It's only price, okay? But I think even if you're using a red FIDIC and you're describing the product in detail, the way the product is being built or the speed at which the project is being built can still differ between the tenders. So if the building process is a possibility to differentiate vendors from other vendors, then you could still use the best value approach. Just the assessment would be on the building process instead of the end product, which has no degrees of freedom. So I would say that it's possible with red FIDIC if there are degrees of freedom in the building process or engineering services.